Hey, my name is Ben Oje. I'm the lead pastor here at NewSpirit.Church. And by a show of hands, I'm wondering how many of you are like me? You're competitive. Raise your hand if you're competitive. Okay. So this lady in the front row was the most competitive. She had her hand up first. Give her a hand. That's my wife. Most competitive person in the entire church. Now, the rest of you, you couldn't even win at hand raising. And we'll just think about that for a second. How sad is that you couldn't even win the hand raising contest at a church? Like you would think that you could at least win at that. And what you have is just the worst combination of competitiveness without competence. That's just the worst combination. You don't want to have that, but some of you have that. You're like, oh, I didn't get it first. And before you feel too bad about me saying that about you, I just want you to know that you're looking at the person with the best combination of competitive spirit, but lack of competence to go along with it. See, I played a lot of sports as a kid, and my parents kept signing me up for all these youth sports, and I was on every single team. I was on the losing team. We never had a winning record. Didn't matter the sport, didn't matter the coach, didn't matter the age. And I was always yelling at the ref, like, why didn't you make that call? Like, it's his fault that we're not winning. And do you want to know what every single one of these teams had in common? This guy. That's a common denominator in every one of those teams. We were never good. But now I just do what every good parent does. I live out my competitive spirit through my children and just sign them up for the competitive sports. The problem is, God gave me a kid who just isn't that coordinated. And then he gave me two more. Sorry, kids. Sorry, I'm just kidding. One of them's not that bad. Here's what else. I'm also a competitive driver, and some of you are like me. I've seen you out there. I have to choose the lane that's going to go the fastest. And so we're coming up Muckleshoot Hill, and I know the right lane's going to go faster, so I get in the right lane. But the problem is sometimes someone's turning right, and I'm backed up in that lane. And so I'm saying, okay, next time I'm going to go in the left lane, so that never happens. But then there's casino traffic, and I'm stuck behind these guys. So I'm competitive about it. I'm just not very good at getting ahead of the traffic. I choose the wrong lane, the line to be in. And I'm also a competitive church planter. And did you know Rick Warren? He planted a church in Southern California, called it Saddleback Church. And it became the biggest church in Southern California. And then he wrote a book called Purpose Driven Life. And then he was a pastor to a president. And I'm sitting here in year 3 of this church plant thinking, we should at least be a mega church by now. It should be happening any moment now. This is just going to take off like that. And did you know, though, that we are the 3rd largest church on this street? Yeah. That is a... Yeah. And we are the largest church in our denomination. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. I won't tell you how many are in it. Praise God. We're doing pretty good. And that's what we do when we're competitive but not competent. We change the score. We just change the rules altogether. And sometimes we'll do this. We'll say, well, that other person, they did it because they cheated, or they're privileged. That's why they're doing better than me. So, or sometimes in response to being competitive and not competent, sometimes we just get more competitive. Like if I just poured more of myself into this, if I devote more time to my work and my hobby, I just got to get better and better and better because I'm not good enough. Sometimes in response to this strange combination, we just feel discouraged and defeated, and we say to ourselves, if I can't be the best, then I'm not going to try anymore. I quit. And sometimes we say, if I can't do it perfect or perfectly, then I'm just not going to do it at all. And I just want to talk to those of you today who sometimes think in one of these ways. Maybe you focus on your flaws. You don't see the progress you've made. You don't see all that you've accomplished. All you see is what you've yet to accomplish and all the flaws, and you get discouraged. Maybe you're too afraid to start something because you're afraid it'll make you look bad. You don't want to look bad, especially in front of people, so you don't try anything new, and you won't challenge yourself unless success is guaranteed. Maybe that's your mindset. Or maybe you avoid feedback. Like, people are afraid to talk to you because you'll bite their head off if they say something that's maybe not even critical, just a critique. It brings out your defenses. And so maybe you're that person. It's just hard to have that feedback. And maybe you think in terms of just all or nothing. If I can't have it all, then I'm going to do nothing, or it's all or nothing in this endeavor. And if either I'm going to be a perfect success at this, or I'm going to be a complete failure at it, and there's no middle ground, and it's all or nothing with you with some things. Or maybe your competitive spirit has you overspending. You're in debt. You're trying to keep up with people who you think are ahead of you, but guess what? They're spending, they're in debt too, but you feel like you got an image to keep up, and this competitive spirit is having some real world consequences now. Or maybe you're critical. You're criticizing your spouse, your kids, because they're not living up to your expectations or what you think families should be like, and now this is a real world consequence of having a competitive, perfectionistic spirit. Maybe some of you are neglecting your kids. You're not overcritical, you're just over neglectful because you're focusing on yourself. And I got to get better at this hobby or this job or this thing I'm doing. They never see you, and you don't give enough time or input to them. And maybe your mindset of competition and perfection, it might be burning you out. If you keep going in this direction and at this pace, you're gonna flame out. Maybe it's making you rigid and inflexible and overall unpleasant. Maybe it's making you depressed and miserable, and you just can't live in this forever. At the root of all of these symptoms is an unmet need. Deep down inside, we all have a need to feel adequate and proficient and decent at something. We all want to be skilled. We all want to be talented. We all want to be gifted, and we want to be intelligent. We have this need to feel accomplished. And the good news is that God provides. He provides for your need to feel competent. Let me say it again. It's the title of our sermon today. God provides for your need to feel competent. And this is part of a series we're doing called Our Unmet Needs. God made us with a lot of needs, and he intends to meet our needs, and that's just what we're talking about in this series. And not only are we creatures of his that have our needs met, we're even meant to go beyond our needs to meet the needs of others and build a kingdom with him and all kinds of cool things. But we talked in week 1 about your most basic need in life, and then we talked about getting in the right position for our needs to be met. Last week, we talked about how God provides for your need to belong. If one of those sounds interesting, maybe you missed one, go on YouTube, find the playlist, catch right up on our sermons. Thank you so much for doing that. And sometimes you might see a vertical video on your Facebook live feed, or not live feed, the vertical video stuff on TikTok or whatnot. If you see that, don't just scroll by it. That tells the social media company that we're not interesting, and they'll just bury us. But if you click on like or make a comment or click on share, that shows them, oh, this is interesting, and we're going to share this with more and more people, get the word of God out to more people in our community, in our region, in our world. And thank you so much for supporting that ministry and helping us get the good word out to more and more people. Today we're answering the question, how does God provide for my need to feel competent? 3 ways. First, God gives you a plan specific to you. Next, God gives you time to develop. It's a great big gift of time. Third, God gives you a role on a team. The bottom line is, with God, you don't have to be the best. Just be your best. You don't have to be the best. Just you. Be your best. And if you've ever met a Christian, who's kind and pleasant, I guarantee you, some of you, okay, I have, and I tell you, they understand these principles we're talking about today. If you've met a Christian who seems to think about you more than themselves, they're humble, and sometimes you meet a Christian who wins with grace and humility, but they also lose with grace and humility. That's a Christian who really understands the principles that we're talking about today. And I just want you to live in that kind of confidence and in that kind of freedom. I want the people around you to experience that kind of freedom and confidence through you as you internalize what we're talking about today. God has met your need to feel competent. Let's go to number 1. How does God provide for my need to feel competent? God gives you a plan specific to you. And you have to understand that God's plan for you is different than God's plan for someone else. It's not the exact same thing. He didn't plan for everyone to dunk a basketball or to be a supermodel or to make $1 billion. That's not everyone's plan. And I know you're wishing that was God's plan for you, but that's his plan for someone else. I wish God's plan for me was to be a megachurch pastor, but God's plan for me was to be your pastor. Isn't that great? Thanks. Hey, that's great. And here's the thing. God didn't want another megachurch pastor. He wanted this specific church. He didn't need another megachurch on this block or town or region. He wanted this church because this church was meant for a specific plan, to reach a specific person, specifically you. And I was the only specific person that God intended to fulfill this specific plan, to have this particular outcome. And so I'm just trying to show you that what's happened is what God has planned and what God has ordained. Sometimes I wish it might be something else, but I have to look at the specific plan that God had for me. And it's the same for you. God specifically made you. He made you one of one. And he didn't have a bad day when he met you. He didn't mess up when he made you. He didn't make junk. He did a good job when he made you. And God has a different plan for you than he does for someone else, because you were made with a specific design for a particular plan that he has ordained for your life. In the scriptures, we read about how the 12 disciples, they were always competitive with each other. And it's just great to get a little insight to watch their bickering. One time they're walking down the road, they're arguing, who's the greatest disciple? It's me. No, it's me. Jesus said it's me. They're just bickering. And one time they were arguing about who's going to be the greatest in heaven. I'm going to sit at Jesus' right hand. No, he said it was going to be me. And they're just fighting as they're going along. And one of the disciples, his name was John. He wrote the book of John, and he just wrote it about his time with Jesus doing ministry for those 3 years. After hearing about Jesus' resurrection from the dead, John wrote this. He said, Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. Do you want to guess who the other disciple was? It was John. He thought he was being humble, but I'll just leave my name out of it. No, he said, I need to tell them, like I reached it first. It was the author, John. And don't you think that seems a little oddly specific? Like, why did we need to know that John outran Peter to get to the tomb first? Why did that make it into the Holy Scriptures? He's writing the Holy Bible, and he's just, these people in the future need to know. I was first. I got there. And I believe he did this because he was competitive. And he was also writing this down to correct the record. You see, the book of Luke came out years earlier, but here's Luke's account of how the resurrection went. Luke writes that they rushed back from the temple to tell the 11 disciples. Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look, but John said, no, Luke, I was there, okay? And Luke forgot to mention that I was there, and he forgot to mention that I was there first, and I was there fastest, and that I was younger at the time. And John just felt the need to write all this down. Why? He's being competitive. He has that competitive spirit, and it even comes through in how the Bible is written. It's a very human way of writing it. And here's what happens in the next chapter. That John writes. In chapter 21, it's actually Peter who's being competitive with John. Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? Peter said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you do not want to go. This sounds like a very specific plan, doesn't it? Jesus is outlining for Peter a very specific plan. Jesus said this to let him know what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. So now Jesus has outlined a very specific plan for Peter. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you. I've intended you for this purpose. I've designed you for this moment. And what's happening next? I have a plan that's specific to you. What does Peter say? Peter turned around and saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during supper and asked, Lord, who will betray you? You remember who that disciple was? It's John. It's the author. Peter asked Jesus, what about him, Lord? What about him? What about his plan? You just told me my specific plan. What about him and his plan? Jesus replied, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me. And I'm wondering if Jesus is saying that to you today. As for you, follow me. If I want that person to get the promotion, be the boss at the company, what is that to you? If I want that other person to have the big house and the big family and all the cool things, what is that to you? If I want that other person to be well known for their talent and their looks and popularity, what is that to you? As for you, you follow me. And Jesus needed John for a specific plan of his own. John was going to grow old, take care of Mother Mary. That was Jesus' specific plan, specific to John. For Peter, it was different. He needed Peter to go die for the sake of Jesus. And in the same way, Jesus has a specific plan for you. It's different than someone else's plan for them. And I know you're hoping that your plan for you was to grow old and be a prolific author, and everyone in the future knows who you are. You're famous like John, and you just got this really cool legacy. But his plan for you is probably more like Peter. It might be to go die for the sake of Jesus. I know you wish it was different, but he has a plan for you that's specific to you. To die to materialism, to die to becoming the best, to die to having the best family, leaving the best legacy, all those me-centric projects. You're supposed to die to those, and that's his plan for you. It might look different than that plan for someone else. And like Peter, Jesus invites you to ditch the competitiveness and embrace the competence that he's given you to specifically accomplish the specific and particular plan that he has for you. Listen, there are a lot of talented people in this world, but you're the most talented person in the entire world at fulfilling the plan that God has specifically for you. You are given the competence for that, and you are the most competent at doing that. Let's look at number 2. How does God provide for my need to feel competent? God gives us time to develop. What a gift. He gives us time. Your competency, it's not instant. It's developed over time. And there's a reason that teenagers make minimum wage. They're not competent yet at most things. Old people make all the money. It's because they've had time to develop and get the experience and get the competency that it takes to do the job and do it the best. And now they're getting all the money. It just takes time. Don't feel bad if you're young and you're not there yet. It takes time to develop. You might have the gift of the Holy Spirit, and that's great. He doesn't make you instantly good at stuff. He doesn't make you an expert overnight. What he does is he enhances you at each stage of development. That's the Holy Spirit's role. At each stage of your development, he gives you enhancement. And in the scripture, let me show you this. David developed his competency over time. It was slow. It took a while. When David was young, the prophet came to his house. The prophet Samuel said to his father Jesse that one of your sons will be anointed the next king of Israel. So Jesse got out all his sons and lined them up, said, here they are, pick a son. Samuel said, do you got any more sons? How would you feel if you were one of those 7 sons? Do you got any other ones? And he said, well, there's David. So Samuel asked, are all these the sons? Are these all the sons you have? Well, they're still the youngest, Jesse replied, but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and the goats. And maybe that's you. You're overlooked. Do you ever feel overlooked like that? Sometimes you're overlooked because you haven't had time to develop yet. And that was David. He had no business even being considered. He wasn't even developed yet. He was so young. And you can be trusted with sheep, and that's about it right now. He's had no time to develop. And it's like Jesse's saying to Samuel, oh, you wanted a king. I thought you wanted a king now. If you want a king now, David is not your guy. But he brought David in, and David was anointed to be the next king of Israel. But David did not become the king overnight. And just because God anointed David to be the next king, it didn't happen right away. He still had a lot of development, and God gave him a lot of time to develop. David slayed a bear, and then he slayed a lion. That was before slaying a giant. He had to develop the gifts and the talent. Before he got to Goliath, he was developed. He was a harp player, and then he became a prolific psalm writer. He had to develop into that. David was a fugitive for a lot of years, and then he became a great military commander. It took time to develop. David served under the current king, Saul, for a number of years before he became the king. It took a lot of development. And when Saul tried to give young David his royal armor to wear, David couldn't even walk in the armor. Look at what it says. In 1 Samuel 17, he says, I can't walk in these, David said to Saul. I can't walk in these. I'm not used to them. So David took them off. And some of you are like that. You're wearing someone else's armor. And you just need to say, I can't walk in this. Just admit it. I can't walk in this armor. I'm not used to it. It's too big for me. I haven't grown in it. I'm not developed enough for this armor. Why don't you take the armor off that God planned for someone else, because you weren't meant to fit that. You don't have the same development they have, so stop wearing it. It's weighing you down. You're not meant to walk in someone else's armor. And it's not that you're not good enough, it's that you're not developed enough yet, and that's okay. It takes time. God's gift for you wasn't instant success. His gift for you was time. And you might be in a rush to just put on the armor and fit it and wear it and be good at it, but God's not rushed. You might be rushed. God's not rushed when it comes to you and your competency and your development. There are skills that you need to learn that can only be learned through experience over time. Some of these take experience over time. If he blessed you with instant competence and instant success and instant talent, then you'd miss out on the patience and the wisdom and the grit that comes with a slow development. And consider that he's not trying to develop in you an outcome. He's trying to develop in you a certain kind of person. Let me just say that again. What he wants out of you is to develop a certain kind of person, not a certain kind of outcome. It takes time. Think of yourself like a Thanksgiving turkey. It took time to cook it. You had to cook it slowly. You got to let those flavors develop. It takes time for the drippings to run off the turkey and into the pan, right? It takes time for the collagen in the meat to just break down and become tender. It takes time for that skin to crisp up, doesn't it? And it can't be done in a hurry. I've seen these idiots online. They're trying to deep fry their turkey and they're catching their house on fire. That's not how this works. It takes time to develop those flavors in the turkey. Okay, it's not done in an Instant Pot. It's not done in an air fryer. It needs consistent temperature over time, and that's what you need. You need consistency and lots of time for your development. Okay, you're not a Pop-Tart. You're a turkey. Don't take me out of context on that, but it helps you remember. You're a turkey. Just don't take me out of context. See what I'm trying to say? It takes time to develop. It might be slow, but it's worth it. Why don't you accept God's gift of time? He's given you time to develop because it takes time to develop. And so what if you're not rich? God's developing something different in you in the season. He's developing wisdom and generosity and a humble spirit. If he just gave you instant richness, you wouldn't have those traits developed. And so what if you're not a big deal at work or a big deal at school? God's developing you something different. He's developing in you skill and maturity and intelligence. You don't get those when you're an instant success at school or work. He's developing those traits in you over time. David spent decades running for his life, but that's where he developed into a compassionate leader. And that's the kind of leader God needed for the nation of Israel. Saul was different. He was a brutal king, but David was the compassionate leader that Israel needed, but it took time to develop that. decades on the run developed in him that kind of compassion. And like David, you're in the process of decades of development. God's making you into the kind of leader he needs for your family, for your community, for your workplace. He's developing you over time. Your development takes time. That's what God has given you, is the gift of time to develop. Number 3, how does God provide for my need to feel competent? He gives you a role on a team. So if life were an individual sport, we'd all be losing. Think about it. Tennis, racing, golf. Every individual sport has one winner and a lot of losers. And if you're trying to play an individual sport and you're not winning, you're one of the many losers at that sport. Some of you are like an MMA fighter. You're training, you're in the ring, and you're just getting beat up. And you're not the winner, you're the loser, and you're getting beat up, and that's just you. And God didn't put you in that individual sport. You're putting yourself in that individual sport because you're competitive. You want to be the best. You want to be better than other people. But God put you on a team. Let me show you this from 1 Corinthians 12. He says, just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its parts form one body, so it is with Christ. Are you with Christ? Yes. Just give a cheer if you're with Christ. Yeah, I'm with Christ. I'm going to get the rest of you. Some of you, not sure, but here we are. The body is not made up of one part, but many. So if you're with Christ, this is you. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. So the great part about being with Christ is that you're no longer with the world. There's a contrast here. With the world, you're playing an individual sport to see who's the best in the world. But instead, God puts you on a team, and that's Team Jesus. If you're with Christ, you're on Team Jesus now. And on Team Jesus, you're not incompetent just because you're not the best on the team. Do you see the difference? But you're actually very competent on Team Jesus because you have a role to play that's specific to you that drives the team toward its objective and success. I want you to think about a football team, and now think about the punter on the football team. He's not big, he's not strong, he's not fast, but he's on the team. Why? Because he's very competent at one thing, punting the ball down the field. And if you've ever seen a team that has an injured punter and they can't punt anymore, that team suffers, and they might lose because that teammate is injured or out of the game for some reason. Think about the long snapper. It's the same thing. He's very competent at one thing. Think about the guy on the sideline with the clipboard. I'm sure he's important. I don't know what he does, but I'm sure he's there for a reason. And without him, that team would suffer so much without his competency at whatever's on that clipboard. And each of them, the long snapper, the clipboard guy, the punter, if you put them in snowboarding, they'd be terrible at it. They'd be totally incompetent at snowboarding, gymnastics. They would be an utter failure at any individual sport. But on a team, they're very competent. They're proficient. They're excellent. And they're on the team that God put them on, fulfilling the role that's specific to them. And they are a vital part of that team and its success and its objectives being met. And in the same way, if you define your success by having the best car and the best house and the best education, the best family, the best looks, you're playing an individual sport. That is not God's team. And you're going to be a failure at all of those things if you're playing by the world's standards for success for your life. But if you define success by being on the right team and using your gifts that God gave you to make the team better, and if that's your definition of success, you're going to be wildly successful, wildly competent at using your gifts for the team and its objective. And I want you to just get off that hamster wheel of that individual sport that the whole world is playing. Get off of that. You're just going to be tired. You're never going to win at it. It's not going to happen. But if you're on Team Jesus and you're using your gifts for his purpose, his objectives, you will not only be wildly successful, you're going to be wildly competent at what God put you on the team for. If you belong to Jesus and you belong on his team, look at what it says in 1 Corinthians. Now you are part of the body of Christ. Each one of you is a part of it. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? And so what he's saying is, don't feel bad if you're not fulfilling someone else's specific plan. That's their plan. God gave you your own plan. Don't feel bad if you can't fit someone else's armor. That's their armor. That armor wasn't meant for you. Don't feel bad if you're not fully developed yet. God's not going to cut you off the team. He has a different role for you on the team. There's always rookies on the team. There's always veterans on the team. There's always mentors and apprentices on God's team. There's always people ahead of you to learn from. There's always people behind you to teach and bring up. That's what it looks like when you're on Team Jesus. And God provided a team for you. You're on the team right now. You're with the team right now. You're in the same room with your team. And on this team, you are a great big part of what God is doing in this world, in your family, in this community, and even in your own lives. You're a great big part of it, and you're in the right place to be on his team. I just want to recap what we've talked about. We talked about how we have a competitive nature. We want to be the best. We talked about perfectionism, and we just talked about how together they steal our life away. The good news is God provides for our need to feel competent. How? How does he provide for our need to feel competent? First, God gives you a plan specific to you. Second, God gives you time. What a great gift. Time to develop. You don't have to be good right away. Number 3, God gives you a role on a team. It's Team Jesus. The bottom line is this. With God, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the best. Just be your best. And that's such great news. It's so freeing. And I'll never forget how freeing it was for me when I put my trust in God for the first time. I didn't have to stress about having the best grades, having the best stuff. Before trusting God, I put my trust in all those competitive, perfectionistic things. With God, man, I could just let all that go, and I was so free. And my confidence at that point came from my security in Jesus, not my security in stuff, or security in accomplishments, security in being better than someone else. I didn't need that anymore. After trusting God, I could look at a rich person and say, good for him. I'm happy for him. I'm not threatened by that because I'm on a different team. And I'll never forget how freeing it was when I learned that God isn't trying to produce in me this certain kind of outcome, that he's trying to produce in me a certain kind of person. And so I don't have to stress so much about what I'm going to do with my career, and if I'm going to have a family that's big, or even a family at all, or this specific job, or enough stuff to look good and be rich like other people. I didn't worry about that anymore, because I knew that God had an objective to me, that he's changing me into a certain kind of person, that he doesn't just want me to accomplish this certain outcome, and he's trying to develop in me a character. And after that, Jesus was just forming my character, not necessarily my competence in these tasks and this hamster wheel that everyone seemed to be on. And I'll just never forget how freeing it was to feel like I don't have to be good at everything anymore. God just gave me a few things to be good at, and that's what it looks like to be on his team, that I'm actually very competent at the things he made me for and he's gifted me for. And just how free is it that I don't have to be good at everything when I'm on his team. Friends, I want you to live in that same freedom that I got to experience, and you're going to find that freedom, you're going to find that confidence when you trust God. Just let it bring down your stress. Watch how it brings down your anxiety. Watch how when you're free from perfectionism, you're going to be free from depression. Your friends, your family, they're going to love the new you. You're going to be less critical. You're going to be less stressed out. They're going to love the new you who gains their confidence, not from being perfect, but from being on the right team. When you gain your confidence from God, not from competitiveness. And when they see, man, this guy knows who he is in God, he knows he's competent, man, how many people are going to be blessed when you live like that? today I want to give you the opportunity to make a decision to live like that, to make a decision to be on Team Jesus. And when you're on Team Jesus, you're saying no to the other teams. I'm not on Team Money anymore. I'm not on Team Beauty. I'm not on Team Perfection. I'm saying no to those teams, but I'm saying yes to Team Jesus. And all those other teams are individual sports masquerading as teams, but there's individual sports where you're guaranteed to lose. And if this is a step that you need to take, I'm asking that you'll make this step tangible and that you'll demonstrate this step. I know you text a lot of people, and if you just use your phone, just pretend you're texting God. Just text the word team to the church's phone number on the screen. The QR code on the screen works to bring that up. It's also on the back of your chair. If you just text the word team and just let that be you declaring your decision. I'm off of the team, whatever it was, and now I'm on Team Jesus. I'm going to start living for him. I'm going to start gaining my confidence and my competence from God, not from the world's standard. Choose the only team where you are 100% competent. Choose the only team where you're not going to get cut. Choose the only team that's going to win in the end. Think about it. When this is all done, when the world is melting away and all that everyone's been running for and racing for and competing for is gone, what's going to be left? There's going to be one team left. That team is victorious, and I want you on that team when we win. It's Team Jesus. Choose the only team that's going to be there when the game is over. In obedience to Jesus and to his teaching, we're moving into a time of communion. And the scriptures say that the Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And so the Bible encourages us to participate in this communion, this Last Supper. And it also warns us to not take this lightly, not to do this with the wrong condition of the heart. It says everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of the bread and drink from the cup. And so I invite you to come to the table. I invite you to participate with this ordinance that Jesus gave us to do, but I also invite you to take this moment to examine yourself. Have I been living an individual sport? Have I been, being competitive and perfectionistic and all these things that God didn't plan for me? Have I been wearing someone else's armor? Have I been living someone else's plan? I just want you to let this communion, let this physical act represent a spiritual decision and a spiritual act that's going on inside of you as you consume the bread and the cup. Let this physical act represent a spiritual act that's happening in you. What decision are you making? What change is happening as you do this? Can I invite you to stand with me? As I walk off the stage, as we enter into the song, as we start to do communion, please don't just think about some cool fact you learned today. Think about, what decision am I making? What change is happening in me? What am I going to do